Forged in flesh and blood, from the physical manifestation of Dwarden legend by Grongni himself, Grombrindel, the White Dwarf, has been reincarnated to unite the clans of the mortal realms. Hello there, in this video we're going to show you how to paint Grombrindel, the White Dwarf, so that he looks awesome on the battlefield and in your display cabinets. The very first issue of White Dwarf was released all the way back in June of 1977, with the first model of the White Dwarf arriving not long after in 1979. This was long before he was named Grombrindel and had a model code of FS17 White Dwarf. Clearly, the model and name have captured the imagination of hobbyists throughout the years, as White Dwarf magazine now celebrates its 500th issue. Alongside this landmark issue, we have the very latest model of the White Dwarf, which shows just how far our miniature design has come along over the years. What I find truly inspiring is that it's clear to see the care and attention our amazing designers have paid to the original model, while creating something exciting and new. Elements like his double-bladed axe have stayed consistent throughout the years. While there have been many incarnations of Grombrindel, there is definitely something really special about having the very first and very latest miniatures side by side. I absolutely cannot wait to get started on this project. The paints we'll be using are on the screen right now. These colours will allow us to take Grombrindel to the next level and really show him off on the battlefield. We also have a list of the additional equipment we've used, but you can use whatever brushes you feel most comfortable with. If you're new to painting or want to brush up on your skills, you can check out the Citadel Color Painting Essentials videos to learn all about our paints and painting techniques. As you can see, we've sprayed our model with Mechanicus Standard Grey for a nice neutral undercoat. Let's get painting. We'll be starting off with the base first to get it done and out of the way. We're using Storm Vermin Fur, as it is a warm tone of grey that will work nicely with the shades we're doing in the later stages. Remember to thin out your paint with a little water so that it runs nice and smoothly off your brush. This is just a general tip that will apply throughout your entire painting process. Remember that it's always good to do multiple thin coats rather than one thick layer. We don't have to worry about being too neat here, just make your way around the base picking out all of the rock details. Once your first coat is dry, come back to do another so that you get good coverage. We're now going to shade all of the rocks with Croak Green. Once the first shade is dry, do another towards the lower sections of the rocks. This will give a nice effect of looking like moss is growing up the rocks from the ground. Shade the recesses with non-oil to add a bit more definition to the base. Soak up any excess with a dried brush. We're now going to do a quick dry brush of Uthwan Grey over the most raised areas of the rocks. If you want to know more about dry brushing, check out our Painting Essentials video all about it. With that done, our rocks are finished. Now to move on to the rest of the details. Okay, we're now going to base all of the red details. We're picking out the cloak, shields, helmet, sword and axe and leather handles, as well as the gems. Be neat around any areas that are next to the rocky base. With that done, we're going to shade all of the red areas with non-oil. Once the first layer is dry on the gems, go over them again to darken them down even further. We're now going to relayer with Mephiston Red over the raised and flat areas of the cloak. This will help to make the cloak highlighting look a bit more naturalistic in the later stages. We'll also paint over the lower 3/4 of the red gems as well, leaving the last quarter darker. The next thing to do is highlight with Evil Sun's Scarlet. This will be an edge highlight for the leather, helmet and shields. For the cloak, we'll do two different highlights. First, we're going to thin it out with a bit more water and apply it as a layer over the raised folds. When that is dry, we're then going to edge highlight the cloak and the raised folds. For the gems, we're looking to brighten towards the bottom area. Paint within the previous stage, but lower down, leaving a transition between the stages. We're now going to do a thinner edge highlight using Wild Rider Red over the same areas as before. However, we're looking to paint within the lines of the previous stage. In order to help us, we're using a small layer brush for this process. Where you can, use the side of your brush and drag it along the edges to help with brush control. When you can't do that, use the tip of the brush and a very light pressure to help keep a straight and consistent line. For the gems, we're going to paint towards the bottom of the Evil Sun Scarlet layer, leaving the top to help with the transition. For our last stage of the red, we're going to use Fire Dragon Bright as a fine edge highlight on the raised folds of the cloak and gems, as well as a dot highlight on the shields and helmet. The difference between the two here is that a fine edge highlight will go along the entire edge and a dot highlight is highlighting where two edges meet. Okay, we're going to do one final detail on the red gems. We need to add some reflection light, and for this we'll be using white scar and a small layer brush to do a dot highlight at the top of the darkest area of the gems. This helps to really sell the effect and make the gems look awesome. With that completed, our gems are finished. Now to move on to the black details. For the black details, we're using Black Legion straight from the pot. We'll be applying this over the Chaos Shield, Auroch helmet and Grombindal's boots. With the black blocked in, we're going to edge highlight the details with Eshin Grey. As always, make your way around the details using the side of your brush where you can to help keep your edge highlights nice and consistent. With that first highlight done, we're now going to do a second one within the lines of the first. For this, we'll be using Administratum Grey. Once that is done, our black details are finished. There aren't many on this model, but with black it always helps to be as neat and sharp as you can with the highlights in order to make the details pop out nicely. Time to move on with the painting process. Okay, with the black details completed, we're going to pick out the leather and wood details using Rhinox hide. This includes Grombrindal's gloves, belt, trousers and pouches. When those are done, we'll pick out the wooden weapon shafts on the base. We're now going to wash all of the brown details with Nuln Oil. Just remember to watch out for any pooling. With the shade dry, the next thing to do is to relayer with Rhinox hide over the raised leather details to set it up for the highlights. It's time to highlight our leather and wood. For this, we'll be using Doombull Brown. We're going to do a mixture of a layer highlight and then an edge highlight on the leather details, same as we did for the cloak earlier. So remember to thin out your Doombull Brown a bit more for the layer over the raised areas. Then, when that is dry, use a little less water to keep the pigment together for an edge highlight. Once that is done, pick out the raised grooves of the wood. Our second highlight on the brown details will be tusk or fur. Paint this within the lines of the previous stage to give that nice transition between the highlight colours. Don't forget to pick out the wood as well. We're now going to finish off the leather with a dot highlight of Kislev flesh on the most raised areas of the leather. And there we go! With the brown details completed, we're now going to move on to the blue tunic. We're going to use Calidor Sky as our base for the blue tunic. It's a beautiful shade of blue that will really help to make the tunic stand out nicely on the model. We just need to take our time now going around the previously painted details. With the blue blocked in, we're going to shade it with Nuln Oil. Watch out for any pooling. Same as we did for the cloak, we're going to relayer over the raised details and folds with our base colour, which is Calidor Sky, leaving the darkened areas in the recesses. Time for our first highlight, and for this we'll use Hoeth Blue to pick out the raised folds and edges. If you make a mistake here, just tidy back up with Calidor Sky. Our final highlight will be Blue Horror over the most raised folds and edges of the tunic. In this case, we'll focus over the folds on the sleeves. And there we go, our blue tunic is completed. Now to move on to the fur. For our fur, we want the brown to be a bit different than our leather and wood, so we're going to use Dryad Bark as our base layer. Be careful blocking it in, as we don't want to mess over our previously painted areas. If we do, just tidy back up with the relevant colours. Once we've blocked in the fur, we'll shade it with Nuln Oil. We're now going to layer over the raised fur with Gorthor Brown, leaving the darker areas in the recesses. For our final highlight, we'll use Baneblade Brown and paint small thin lines over the most raised areas of the fur. This will add some texture to our fur and make it look like light is catching individual hairs at the top. With that completed, our fur is done. We're really cracking on with the painting process now. Not too many paints left to go. Okay, we're going to focus on the metallics now. We'll start with the silver details, and for this we'll be using Iron Warriors to base coat them all with. So we're looking for any working metals, weapon blades and armour. As always, when blocking in a base layer, just be neat going around the previously painted areas. With all the silver blocked in, we'll now shade it with Nuln Oil. Remember to look out for pooling. Next, We're going to add a bit more depth to our silver and do a focus recess shade using Black Legion mixed with contrast medium to a 1:1 ratio. We're doing this around all of the scale mail, the recesses on the boot armor, as well as the recesses of the inner flat area of the axe. Once that is dried, we're going to use Ironbreaker to layer over the scale mail, leaving the darkened silver in the recesses. We're also going to layer over the sharp blades of all the weapons. Finally, we're going to use Stormhost Silver to edge highlight around all of the silver. When edge highlighting metallics, you want to keep the edge as thin as you can to show off the fact that the surface is hard and sharp. So just take your time going around the silver to do this. A good tip when edge highlighting is to paint towards yourself, as this helps you with your brush control. With that completed, we'll now move on to all of the gold details. Alright, we're almost there with our white dwarf. Time to make Grombrindal happy and paint all of the gold details. For this, we'll be using Retributor armor to base the details in with. As always, be careful going around the previously painted areas. If we look at the box art, we can see that the gold is very warm and has a slight red tone to it. In order to replicate this, we'll be using Fireslayer flesh thinned with contrast medium to a 1:2 ratio to wash all over the gold. Once that is dry, you can then add another layer straight into the deepest recesses if you wanted to as well. For the gold details on the base, we'll shade them with non-oil in order to darken them down and make them look more weathered. With the gold shaded, we're now going to layer over the raised areas with Auric Armor Gold. This paint is quite thin already, so just add a little bit of water to it in order to help it flow off the brush nicely. We're only looking to pick out the raised details here, so try not to get it into the recesses. If you do, just tidy back up with the previous colors. When doing the gold on the base, we're looking to use Auric Armor as an edge highlight, and we're going to leave the gold there. With that done, we now need to edge highlight the gold on our white dwarf. For this, we'll use Stormhost Silver and carefully pick out all of the edges with a controlled, thin line around them. Remember that metallic areas look much more realistic with as thin an edge highlight as you can. So try and use the side of your brush where you can to glide around the edges. And with that done, our metallics are now finished and they look awesome. I would recommend refreshing the water in your water pot now, as we don't want any metallic flakes to mix with the rest of your paint. Right, we're going to focus on painting Grombrindal's face next. As we can see on the box art, he has a very pale skin tone but still has red flushes in it, so this should be really good fun to paint. For our base layer, we'll use Kislev flesh. This is a layer paint, so we'll need a few coats of this to build up good coverage. When applying your layers over the skin, remember not to paint the same area repeatedly, but quickly move the paint around the entire detail. Once the entire area is done, let it dry completely before going back over for another layer. This helps to stop the buildup of any unwanted texturing and leaves the surface nice and smooth. Remember that this is your model, so you can paint the skin tone in any way that you want to. If you want to know more about painting skin tones, you can always go check out this video all about how to do various different skin tones. Alright, with our skin blocked in, we'll add some depth to it next. We'll be using Fireslayer flesh, thinned out with contrast medium to a 1:2 ratio to shade the entire face. When that is dry, you can always do a second layer into the deepest recesses and where the skin meets the hairline. We're now going to relayer over the raised details with thin Kislev flesh. Make sure to keep this out of the recesses of the face in order to keep that nice shading you've done in the previous step. Next up, we'll layer over the raised areas of the face with Flayed One flesh. Again, remember to use a bit of water to thin out the paint to keep it nice and thin and help with getting a smooth finish for the skin. You can do a couple of layers here to build up the paint in order to get that pale skin tone. Okay, we're almost there with the skin details. Next, we're using Wraithbone to go over the most prominent features of the face as a highlight. So we're looking to focus on the nose, forehead, under the eyes, lips, ears, and the top of the cheeks. Right, we can see on the box art that his nose is a little flushed, so we need to thin out Tuskor fur with Lamia medium and apply it around the bottom section of his nose to add a bit of color to it. We'll do a 1:2 ratio here. We can also run this mix over the bottom lip to add some colour there as well. Next, we need to focus on his eyes. Firstly, we'll block out the eyes with Black Legion. Use a small layer brush here and a very small amount on the tip of your brush to pick out the eyes. If you make a mistake, tidy back up with the previous colours. Right, now for the fun bit. We'll use white scar to do 2 small dots on either side of the eye. This will create the pupil in the centre for us. When doing the small dots, a good tip here is to do some practice dots without the paint first, just getting your muscle memory in place for when you do it with the paint. Another will be to hold your breath for the application, if you can, to help steady your hand. Painting the eyes like this is slightly more advanced than normal, but it gives a great effect and frames the entire area nicely when painting with black first. With that completed, our skin and facial details are finished. Now to paint Grombrindal's glorious white hair. Okay, we need to block in the hair as well as some of the last remaining base details. For this, we're going to use Celestra Grey. Once we've blocked in all of the white details with Celestra Grey, we'll shade the hair with Space Wolves Grey thinned with contrast medium. We're looking for a 1:3 ratio here and applying it over the area. If you see any pooling, just soak it up. Once the paint is dry, if you wanted to, you can do another controlled layer into the deepest recesses just to darken them down a little more. Next up, we'll shade over the other white details with non-oil thinned to a 1:1 ratio with Lamia medium. These are the helmet horns, shield skeleton and skull we can find on the base. We're now going to layer over the raised areas of the hair and base details using Ulthuan Grey, making sure to leave the darkened paint in the recesses. Finally, we'll use white scar to highlight the hair and base details. For the skeleton on the base, we're picking out the edges around the eye sockets, teeth and ribs. For the hair, we're just looking to pick out the most raised details that we can see, leaving the previous layer still visible. Take your time when doing this and try to keep the lines as smooth as possible. This is the last step for painting your white dwarf, and you've earned doing this little extra detail to really make Grombrindal stand out on the battlefield. Alright, for a bit of extra detail, we're going to add some rust onto the weapons and armour that we can see on the base. In order to do this, we'll thin down Doomball Brown to a 1:3 ratio with Lamia medium and apply that all over the weapons and armour. Spread the paint around, getting good coverage all over. Try to concentrate it in the recesses and cracks as well. With the Doomball Brown layer completed, we'll now do a more focused layer of Scrag Brown thinned with Lamia medium to a 1:3 ratio. We're applying this within the previous step and into the deepest recesses and cracks that we can see. Don't be tempted to do everything. Leave some of the Doomball Brown areas alone. This will help to show a variation in the rust. Our final step will be to use Fire Dragon Bright thinned with a 1:3 ratio with Lamia medium and apply this very sparingly within the Scrag Brown step. Pick out some areas here and there, and you can also stipple this last step on as well to add some texture to the rust. With that last step done, our rusty weapons and armour is complete. All that's left to do is paint the rim of the base in whatever colour matches the rest of your army. We've done it with Steel Legion Drab. And there we go, with the rusty blades picked out, Grombrindal the White Dwarf is finished and ready to take on the nefarious villains of the mortal realms. We've had a lot of fun with this video, and we hope that it's given you the inspiration to get your Grombrindal painted and onto the battlefield. For this video, I've also painted up the original 1979 incarnation so we can see how the two versions of the White Dwarf look side by side in all their glory. As you can see, I've done the new paint scheme on the old model, as I feel this will really help to celebrate everything there is about the history of White Dwarf. For more tutorials, tips and tricks, check out our videos on the Warhammer YouTube channel or head to your local Warhammer store where our amazing staff will be more than happy to help. Well, we hope you've enjoyed this video and we'll see you again soon. Bye bye!